It is time for the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. We're back to Russia, Ukraine. We'll talk a little Belarus as well as Georgia. Daniel Davis, always a pleasure to have you on my program, my friend. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure to be here, Brian.
So we have saboteurs in Russia.
We've had saboteurs really all over the place. There's been a lot of this stuff going on for quite some time in Russia. There's a growing amount of saboteurs in Europe as well. They're starting to get real concerned about that. Honestly, it's warfare, and it takes all the different places from the front lines of the battle to the diplomatic halls and to the economic in the various places where war material are made. So this is certainly no surprise, and it's just another ugly part of war.
It is, and I try to start off normally on a more intelligent basis, a springboard to enter into our conversations. But I just was observing during this whole discussion that we've had weeks and now years, I guess, about the Russia-Ukraine situation. Russia typically is presented as, or at least appears to have, sort of a unified front. Its people are all behind Vladimir Putin. Everybody's on his side. You know, they've got the troops, they've got the armaments, and they're making inroads into Ukraine. Ukraine's divided. Ukraine's filled with a bunch of Russians who don't want to be a part of Ukraine. All they're trying to do is liberate. I mean, yeah, it's the fog of war. We talk about it a lot, but didn't realize that Putin himself is having problems domestically, which I can't say that I'm disappointed about. I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin, even though I know he's probably going to end up winning this war with Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, he is going to end up winning it. I mean, the fundamentals are really irreversible. They're so far in Russia's favor, and the biggest issue is manpower. Ukraine is suffering, by Ukrainian reports, Western reports, up to 100,000 desertions, when that number is just skyrocketing. You just can't fight like that and have any chance to win. But I'd be careful a little bit about some of these reports coming out of Russia about dissent or whatnot, because it's comparatively small. We'll see if it develops into anything, but I honestly think it's going to be too little too late, and it's unclear just how widespread it actually is.
Well, it seems, and I'm not sure if the election of Donald Trump had an impact on this, but I hear Zelensky now talking about maybe some sort of negotiating a peace deal. I see that maybe there was a ceasefire negotiated between Israel and Lebanon. I mean, is Trump going to be is Trump consequential in these seemingly like baby steps toward? I don't know if I dare use the word peace in this conversation, but some sort of settlement agreements or some resolution of these conflicts.
Well, without question, there was a major, major impact on the Russia-Ukraine war, far more than anything in Israel, though I'll talk about that separately. The issue with the Ukraine side is that Volodymyr Zelensky is doing everything he can to try to avoid the Trump effect. I mean, he still wants weapons. He still wants all these things. He's trying to get people still, even in this 11th hour, to try to give him more weapons and more ammunition so he can have a better negotiating position. But then when in this Sky News interview you're talking about here a few days back, when you listen to him, he still doesn't want to give up anything. He still says, well, it's illegal for me to give up any territory for peace, but we're going to have to to get the hot phase over, but then we'll get it back later as long as we have NATO. That's the reason why Russia went to war in the first place. So that's a complete non-starter. Look, Trump is coming in and he has unequivocally said he's going to end the fighting. He's not going to keep supporting it. So I think that Zelensky should probably recognize what's happening and move into a direction that makes some sense, because the one he's going is not going to work.
Well, and let's go back to the point you made early on. And I read the same information. The desertion level in the Ukrainian forces is really high. And you can have all the weapons in the world laying around, but if you have somebody to use them, it's not going to do you a whit's worth of good. It should become some big ammo dump that Putin's going to come in and take advantage of himself when he runs over the territory.
Well, and there was another really peculiar thing he said in that interview. So remember, in the context here, back in May, we finally passed that $61 billion deal that everybody at the time said was decisive and was going to make a difference or whatever. We didn't see it make any difference at all. But now then that Biden is trying to get those last, I think, $8 billion out the door before January 20th, to just surge the zone, as Jake Sullivan said in an interview. You had Zelensky saying, we have 10 brigades and we've been trying for a year to get them outfitted and we've only got 2.5. So then the question is, where did all that money go and what did it buy? Because you're telling me you have 7.5 brigades with no equipment. and you don't have enough people and they're deserting, etc. Everywhere you look, this thing is just falling apart.
Well, I think most of my listening audience is aware that Ukraine, not exactly the most upright country in terms of lack of corruption. It has been a long time problem with corruption. It goes back to Biden withholding $1 billion of aid because, well, they had a little problem there with the prosecutors in Barissimo Holdings. Interesting connection there. So it doesn't shock me that maybe some of the resources we've sent to that country have gone missing. We can't even do our own accounting of our own American military here with our own resources.
Well, there's true. Yeah, we can't even. The Pentagon has never passed an audit, so I don't know why we think Ukraine's going to be able to. But you see on the battlefield, it has an impact.
Yes, it does. And let's see, we haven't talked about the situation in Israel for a while, so let's get your an update on your current position relative to. I know it looks like Lebanon might be settling down a little bit, and there's always breaches of the ceasefire agreements. But where are we vis-a-vis Lebanon, Israel, and I guess Gaza as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of different factors, in some positive, some not so positive for Israel. You got to admit and concede that militarily, they have been really devastating to the entire Hezbollah organization, from the top all the way down to that pager and walkie-talkie attack, the decapitation of all the leadership, and then the physical incursion there has had an absolute devastating effect on Hezbollah. And that was one of the reasons why they agreed to the ceasefire. Israel agreed to the ceasefire because they were having real problems with casualties, and their reserve forces have been on duty so long. I think we're into the 14th now, heading toward the 15th month of overall conflict, and they need a breather as well. But then you also see that Iran had been promising after the last Israeli attack that they would retaliate and respond in kind, but now then they were the first ones to get behind the ceasefire against Hezbollah, so they're also licking their wounds. So bottom line is it's kind of put a lull on things and give people a chance to breathe. But the problem is none of the underlying conditions that led to war in the first place are even being addressed, and you have this whole problem still raging in Gaza. So we're not out of the woods yet, but there is at least a breather on a couple of fronts.
And before we part company, Daniel Davison, I always enjoy these conversations. I'm going to jump over back to Russia. I've read reports that they're having a bit of problem with their currency. The ruble is not doing real well. And if the backbone of your system of government, obviously the ruble, is collapsing, that causes you real long-term problems and even short-term problems. Is there any truth or connection with what's going on in terms of the war situation, the relationship with the Iranians or anybody else over there that the ruble is causing or impacting?
Yeah, it has spiked of late. It also spiked in the first part of the war, like really, really high. And of course, that's when everybody first thought the sanctions were going to have their crippling effect. And then their institutions, their financial institutions took action at the government level and brought it back down to a stable area. Now it's seeing another spike. It's a little bit surprising in that it's coming, a month and a half now after the BRICS meeting, which was to solidify their economic base or so. It's still a little early to see if this is a blip or if it's going to be an indication of something more serious, because if it keeps going in that direction, it will cause ripple effects across their entire economy. But of course, they're going to do whatever they can to try and get that back under control. We'll have to wait and see whether they succeed or whether this is just an indicator of more trouble to come.
Well, our popcorn will stay out. In the meantime, I'll look forward to another discussion next Tuesday. Deep dive with Daniel Davis. Always enjoy our conversations, my friend, and already looking forward.
Always my pleasure.